Did you know that the giant white dragon in the NeverEnding Story was so heavy and so complicated that it took an entire army of puppeteers just to make it breathe? Most people watch that movie and think it was pure movie magic, but behind every magical moment was sweat, creativity, and sometimes even real pain. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about the NeverEnding Story. Number 20. The book that started it all was almost ignored before there was a movie. There was a book. Michael Ende wrote the NeverEnding Story in German, and it was published in 1979. The book was a massive hit in Germany. Children loved it. Adults loved it. But when Hollywood first heard about it, many studios were not interested. They thought a story about a boy reading a magical book was too quiet, too slow, and not exciting enough for the big screen. Imagine that. One of the most beloved fantasy films of all time was almost rejected before anyone even picked up a camera. A German production company called Neue Konstantin Film finally decided to take the risk. They believed in the story even when others did not. They saw something that Hollywood could not see yet. They saw a world that needed to be built, a dragon that needed to fly, and a boy that needed to be saved. Without their courage, Fantasia would have stayed only on the pages of a book. The production team began working on a plan that would cost more money than any German film had ever spent before. They were stepping into unknown territory, just like the characters in the story itself. It was a leap of faith, and that leap changed cinema history. What looked like a risk became a revolution. One small yes changed everything. Number 19. The most expensive German film ever made at that time when filming began in 1983, The NeverEnding Story carried an enormous budget. The total cost reached about $27 million. That number might not sound shocking today, but in 1983, it was extraordinary. It made The NeverEnding Story the most expensive German film ever produced at that time. No German production had ever spent that kind of money on a single movie. The pressure was enormous. Every department had to deliver something that had never been done before. The sets had to look like another world. The creatures had to feel alive. The story had to touch hearts across every country and every language. The producers knew they could not afford to fail. They were building something monumental, and they could feel the weight of it every single day on set. The crew worked long hours. The designers stayed up late sketching and resketching creatures until they got them right. The budget was tight in some places and generous in others. They had to choose very carefully where to spend and where to save. It was a giant puzzle made of dreams and dollars, but they kept going because they believed in the story. And in the end, that belief paid off in a way nobody could have fully predicted. What looked financially impossible turned into a timeless classic. Number 18. Falkor was operated by more than 10 people at once. Falkor the Luck Dragon is the heart of the movie. He is warm, gentle, and impossible not to love. But creating Falkor was one of the most complicated technical challenges of the entire production. The puppet that became Falkor was enormous. It was built with a massive internal frame made of metal and foam, covered in thousands of hand-applied pink and white scales. Each scale was placed by hand, one by one. It took weeks just to complete the outer surface. But the real challenge was making Falkor move. Because Falkor was so large and had so many moving parts, it took more than 10 puppeteers working at the exact same time to bring him to life. Some controlled his head, some controlled his lips, some controlled his eyes. Others managed the subtle movements of his body and snout. Every single movement had to be perfectly coordinated. If one person moved too fast or too slow, Falkor would look wrong, broken, or unnatural. The team rehearsed for days before any filming even began. They had to learn to work as one body, one mind, one creature. There were moments of frustration. There were moments when everything went wrong and they had to start again. But then there were moments when Falkor turned his head and smiled, and suddenly everyone on set forgot all the hard work. He felt real, completely, impossibly real. What looked like one magical creature was actually a team of 10 humans breathing together in perfect silence. Number 17. The child actor who played Bastian was hiding real emotions. Barrett Oliver played Bastian Bucks, the lonely boy who discovers the magical book. Bastian is a boy who has lost his mother, struggles to make friends, and escapes into the world of stories. When you watch Barrett Oliver on screen, his sadness feels genuine. His eyes carry something heavy. That is because the director, Wolfgang Petersen, told Barrett very little about what to expect in certain scenes. He wanted real reactions, not rehearsed ones. Barrett was just a child, around 10 years old at the time of filming. He was working on a massive set surrounded by giant puppets and complicated machinery. The world around him was strange and unfamiliar, and rather than shielding him from that strangeness, Peterson used it. He let the child feel the wonder and the confusion. He let the unfamiliar world do the work. In the scene where Bastian finally shouts the Empress's name from the attic window during a thunderstorm, the rain was real and the wind was powerful. Barrett was genuinely cold, genuinely overwhelmed, and genuinely emotional. That rawness is what you see on screen. His tears were not performed. His shaking voice was not an acting choice. It was a child in the middle of a storm, doing his very best. That wasn't acting. It was real feeling caught on camera. Number 16, Noah Hathaway, trained like an athlete for the role of Atreyu playing Atreyu, required more than just reading lines. Noah Hathaway, who was around 11 years old during filming, had to ride horses, run through elaborate sets, and physically wrestle with enormous puppet creatures. To prepare for all of this, Noah went through a serious physical training program. He trained with horses every day so that he and his horse would become comfortable with each other. He built up his stamina so he could run take after take without slowing down. He strengthened his body so that the physically demanding scenes would not injure him. The training was intense for a child his age. Some days were harder than others, but Noah embraced it. He wanted to be Atreyu in every possible way, and it showed in the final film. His movements were confident. His riding looked natural and brave. When he ran with purpose. When he fell like a warrior. However, despite all the training and all the preparation, there was one scene that nearly went terribly wrong. A stunt involving water and a set piece created a situation where Noah was in genuine danger for a moment before the crew intervened. Preparation does not always protect you from the unexpected. What looked heroic on screen came from real effort, real training, and real risk. Number 15. The Swamp of Sadness scene caused real distress on set. There is one scene in the NeverEnding Story that breaks hearts every single time. It is the scene where Atreyu's horse, Artax, sinks slowly into the swamp of sadness and dies. It is one of the most emotionally powerful moments in any children's film. But filming that scene was deeply upsetting for everyone involved, especially for Noah Hathaway. The crew used a hydraulic platform beneath the water to slowly lower the horse into the swamp. The animal was completely safe. The horse was calm and unharmed throughout the process. But watching it happen, seeing that beloved creature slowly disappear beneath the dark water, was too much for Noah to simply act through. He was genuinely crying. His grief in that scene was not manufactured or guided by direction. He loved the horses he had worked with during training. He had built a real relationship with them, and seeing one of them, even in a safe and controlled situation, appear to be lost was heartbreaking. The entire set became quiet during that scene. Crew members who had seen everything in their careers stood silently with tears in their eyes. A children's movie had reached into their chests and squeezed. Wolfgang Petersen captured something that money cannot buy, which is authentic grief. What looked like a scene about a horse was really a scene about loss, and everyone on set felt it deeply. Number 14. Wolfgang Petersen almost did not direct the film. Wolfgang Petersen is now a legendary filmmaker known for Das Boot, Air Force One, and Troy. But before the NeverEnding Story, he was still building his reputation. When the producers of the film were searching for a director, Petersen was not the first name on every list. He had to convince them that he was the right person for the job. He had a powerful vision for the story. He saw the film not as a simple children's adventure, but as a profound exploration of imagination, grief, and the power of storytelling. He spoke passionately about what the movie could become. He described the world of Fantasia in detail. He explained how every creature, every landscape, and every emotional beat would connect to the audience in a deep and lasting way. The producers listened, and slowly they became believers. Petersen got the job, but the journey to that point was filled with uncertainty. He could have been passed over for someone with a bigger name or a safer track record. The history of cinema is full of films that went to the wrong director. This one found the right one. What could have been an ordinary fantasy movie became something extraordinary because one director refused to let it be anything less. Number 13. The Ivory Tower was built as a real physical set in today's world of movies. A location like the Ivory Tower would be created almost entirely using computers. Every tower, every bridge, every magical detail would be generated digitally. But in 1983, none of those tools existed in the way they do now. So the production designers had to build everything, physically, with their hands. The Ivory Tower, the central location in Fantasia where the childlike empress lives, was constructed as a real set inside a massive studio in Bavaria, Germany. The team used a combination of sculpted foam, fiberglass, painted plaster, and elaborate lighting to create the tower's dreamlike appearance. Every arch, every spire, every glowing detail was designed and built from scratch. The result was breathtaking. When the camera moved through the Ivory Tower, it felt like it was moving through a real place, because in many ways it was. The physical reality of the set gave the actors something genuine to react to. They were not imagining a green wall. They were standing inside something that looked and felt magical. The designers worked for months on the tower before a single frame was shot there. Their dedication is visible in every scene. You can feel the weight and the history of the place even through the screen. What looked like fantasy was built with very real hands. Number 12. The Childlike Empress was played by a teenager who almost quit acting. Tommy Stronach played the Childlike Empress, the fragile but powerful ruler of Fantasia. Her performance is otherworldly. She seems to float above everything, untouched by fear, radiating a kind of ancient wisdom that feels impossible for a young person to carry. What makes her performance even more remarkable is that Tommy Stronach was a teenager when she filmed the movie, and she had very little acting experience before landing the role. She was discovered through an open casting search. The producers were looking for someone who could embody a quality that could not be taught, a kind of natural otherworldliness. When Tommy walked into the audition room, something about her immediately caught everyone's attention. She had it. Whatever it was, she had it. After the NeverEnding Story, Tommy largely stepped away from acting. She became a dance teacher and choreographer. Many fans wondered for years what happened to the girl who played the Empress. She had not disappeared. She had simply chosen a different path. She still speaks warmly about the film and about what it meant to her. But her absence from Hollywood made her performance feel even more mysterious, as if the childlike Empress herself had simply returned to another world. What looked like a career beginning was actually a beautiful one-time gift to cinema. Number 11. Michael Ende hated the movie so much he tried to stop its release here is a fact that shocks almost everyone who hears it. Michael Ende, the man who wrote the original book, hated the film adaptation. Not just a little. He hated it deeply, passionately, and loudly. Ende felt that the movie had completely misunderstood his story. In his book, the central theme was about the relationship between the real world and the imaginary world and how they affect each other. He believed the film stripped away all the deeper meaning and turned his profound story into a simple adventure movie. Ende was so unhappy with the production that he tried to have his name removed from the film. He took legal action in an attempt to stop the movie from being released. His efforts were unsuccessful. The movie was released with his name attached, and it became a massive international hit. But Ende never forgave the filmmakers. He refused to endorse the film and publicly criticized it for the rest of his life. It is one of the most painful ironies in movie history. The man who created the world of Fantasia wanted nothing to do with its most famous version. The creator and the creation were separated by a gulf of disagreement that was never bridged. What the world celebrated, the author mourned. Number 10. The Auryn symbol became a real cultural icon. The Auryn is the golden medallion that Atreyu wears throughout the movie. It features two snakes intertwined in a circle, each one biting the tail of the other. It is a symbol of infinity, balance, and the power of storytelling. In the film, the Auryn represents protection and guidance. Atreyu is given the medallion by the childlike Empress as a sign of her trust and hope. On screen, it looks beautiful. But what happened after the movie was released was something nobody predicted. The Auryn symbol took on a life of its own in the real world. People had it tattooed on their skin. They wore it as jewelry. They painted it, drew it, carved it into wood and stone. Fans from every country recognized it instantly. It became one of those rare symbols that escapes its original story and becomes something that belongs to everyone. To many people who grew up with the film, the Auryn is not just a prop from a movie. It is a reminder of childhood wonder, of the power of imagination, and of the courage to keep going when the world feels like it is falling apart. A simple piece of jewelry from a fantasy film became a real-world talisman for millions of people. One symbol, quietly, changed how an entire generation thought about stories. Number 9. The Rockbiter was controlled by a single performer inside a giant suit. The Rockbiter is one of the most visually striking characters in the entire film. He is enormous, made entirely of stone, with hands the size of boulders and a gentle voice that does not match his terrifying appearance. Watching him on screen, you might assume he was a combination of puppets, remote controls, and camera tricks. The truth is both simpler and more extraordinary. The Rockbiter was primarily performed by a single actor seated inside a massive constructed suit and set piece. The performer, a German actor named Alan Oppenheimer, provided the voice in the English version, but the physical performance came from the team who built and operated the creature on set. The Rockbiter's hands were sculpted to be large enough for the actor playing Atreyu to sit inside comfortably, which is exactly what happened in certain scenes. The rock texture was created by layering different materials and then painting them by hand to look like actual stone. Under strong lights, the illusion was perfect. The Rockbiter felt heavy and ancient and real. But behind that rock surface was craftsmanship and dedication. The scenes where the Rockbiter mourns his stone friends who were consumed by the nothing are among the most quietly emotional moments in the film. A giant made of rock, crying without tears. What looked immovable turned out to carry the greatest sadness. Number 8. The Nothing was one of the hardest visual effects challenges of the film. The Nothing is the villain of the NeverEnding Story, but it is a villain you cannot see, cannot touch, and cannot fight with a sword. The Nothing is the absence of imagination. It is the force that destroys Fantasia by making people stop believing in stories and dreams. Representing something that does not exist on screen is one of the hardest things a filmmaker can do. How do you show emptiness? How do you make an audience afraid of nothing? Wolfgang Petersen and his visual effects team wrestled with this challenge for a long time. They eventually decided to represent the Nothing through a combination of dark, swirling visual effects, strange lighting, and the reactions of the characters who witness it. They used optical printing techniques, which involved layering multiple filmed images on top of each other in the camera lab. They used smoke and carefully controlled wind machines to create a sense of something approaching without showing anything concrete. The effect was disorienting and deeply unsettling in exactly the right way. You never quite see the Nothing, but you feel it. You feel its edges, you feel its approach, and that feeling is more frightening than any monster. The most terrifying thing in the film was the thing you could never fully look at. What looked like emptiness was built from layers of invisible craft. Number 7. The film was shot entirely in Bavaria, Germany, and never left Europe. Many people assume that a film as visually diverse as The NeverEnding Story must have been shot in multiple countries or on location in different landscapes. The deserts, the swamps, the flying sequences, the enormous interior sets, all of it seems too varied to have come from one place. But every single frame of The NeverEnding Story was shot in Bavaria, Germany. The production was based at the Bavaria Film Studios in Munich, one of Europe's largest and most historic film studios. The studio provided the massive stage spaces needed for the interior sets, like the Ivory Tower and the swamp. The surrounding countryside and controlled studio environments provided everything else. The team did not need to travel the world because they built the world themselves. They constructed Fantasia piece by piece inside studio walls and in controlled outdoor locations nearby. The landscapes were designed, not discovered. The deserts were created using sand brought to specific locations. The swamps were carefully engineered water environments. Everything you see in the film was imagined, designed, and built by a team of artists who never left their home country. It is a testament to the power of imagination combined with dedicated craftsmanship. The whole world of Fantasia came from one studio in Germany. That is not just impressive. That is miraculous. Number 6. The film's score was composed by Klaus Doldinger and Giorgio Moroder. The music of The NeverEnding Story is unforgettable. The main theme, performed by the pop duo Limahl, became a worldwide hit and remains one of the most recognizable songs from any 1980s film. But the full orchestral score that runs beneath the entire film was created by two very different composers working together. Klaus Doldinger, a German jazz musician and film composer, wrote the orchestral score for the movie. His music is sweeping, emotional, and deeply cinematic. It matches the wonder and the sadness of Fantasia perfectly. At the same time, Giorgio Moroder, the legendary Italian electronic music producer who had already won Academy Awards for his work on Midnight Express and Flashdance, wrote and produced the pop songs for the film, including the famous title track. The combination of Doldinger's classical orchestration and Moroder's electronic pop production was unusual. These were two very different musical worlds being asked to share the same film. But somehow, it worked. The orchestral score made Fantasia feel ancient and vast. The pop songs made it feel immediate and emotionally accessible. Together, they wrapped the entire film in a sound that felt both timeless and absolutely of its era. When you hear that main theme today, you are instantly back in 1984, and everything you felt as a child comes rushing back. Music had never been so perfectly matched to a story about stories. Number 5. Limahl almost did not record the famous theme song. The NeverEnding Story theme song, with its soaring chorus and dreamlike lyrics, was performed by Limahl, who was the former lead singer of the British pop group Kajagoogoo. But the story of how that recording came to exist is not a simple one. Giorgio Moroder, who was producing the song, had a specific vision for what the vocals needed to sound like. He needed a voice that was both powerful and ethereal, strong enough to carry the melody, but light enough to feel like it belonged in a fantasy world. Limahl was considered, but so were other singers. There were discussions, auditions, and decisions that could have gone in multiple directions. Limahl got the role, but the recording process was not straightforward. Getting the vocals exactly right took multiple sessions. The producers had very precise ideas about the tone, the emotion, and the execution. Limahl had to inhabit not just a pop song, but an entire world in 3 minutes of music. When the recording was finally finished, and everyone heard the final version for the first time, the room went quiet. Then someone said it was perfect. That 3-minute song went on to chart in multiple countries, introduce millions of people to the film, and become a permanent fixture in the soundtrack of an entire generation's childhood. What almost did not happen became something eternal. Number 4. Noah Hathaway was involved in a serious accident during filming. Noah Hathaway's time on the set of The NeverEnding Story was filled with physical challenges, but one incident went beyond the expected difficulties of making an action-oriented fantasy film. During a scene involving water, Noah was caught in a situation that became genuinely dangerous. The details of exactly what happened have been described slightly differently over the years, but the core of the story is consistent. Noah was in the water for a scene, and something went wrong with the equipment or the setup that put him in real danger for a frightening moment. The crew responded quickly, and Noah was not seriously harmed, but the incident shook everyone on set. It was a reminder that even with the most careful planning, even with the most experienced crew, filmmaking carries real physical risk. Noah himself has spoken about this moment in interviews, acknowledging that it was frightening, but also that it did not diminish his passion for the film or the story. He continued working after the incident. He continued giving everything to the role of Atreyu. That commitment, after a moment that could have easily made a child walk away, is its own kind of bravery. What happened on that set was not just a story about making a movie. It was a story about courage in the most literal sense. Number 3. The film was the first major fantasy epic built almost entirely without computers. Today, we take it for granted that fantasy films are built in computers. The dragons are digital. The worlds are generated. The creatures are designed in software before they ever appear on screen. But The NeverEnding Story was made in a time when none of those tools existed in a usable form. Every creature you see in that film was built by hand. Every landscape was physically constructed or found in nature and dressed by a production design team. The flying sequences with Falkor were achieved using a combination of genuine mechanical rigging, wind machines, carefully controlled camera angles, and the physical performance of the puppet team. There was no safety net of digital correction in post-production. If something looked wrong when they were filming it, it looked wrong in the movie. If a puppet's eye moved incorrectly, that incorrectness was permanent. The pressure this placed on every single crew member was immense. They were creating a world that had never existed before, using only materials they could hold in their hands, in a time before the digital revolution had given filmmakers a way to fix their mistakes later. The result is a film that has a texture and a warmth that many modern fantasy films struggle to match. You can feel the handmade quality of Fantasia. You can sense the human touch behind every frame. No computers, just hands, creativity, and stubborn love. Old tools, infinite magic. Number 2. The film inspired an entire generation of fantasy writers and filmmakers. The NeverEnding Story was released in 1984, and it reached a generation of children at exactly the right moment. These were children who grew up before the internet, before video games dominated every spare moment, before screens were everywhere. They had books, and they had movies, and they had imagination. The NeverEnding Story spoke directly to that imagination. It said that stories are not just entertainment. Stories are survival. Stories are the thing that holds the world together. That message landed deeply in the minds and hearts of a generation of young viewers. Many of the writers, directors, animators, and game designers who rose to prominence in the 1990s and 2000s have cited the NeverEnding Story as a foundational influence. They saw Fantasia as children and decided they wanted to build worlds just like it. They saw Atreyu's journey and wanted to create heroes who faced real fear. They heard the Childlike Empress speak and understood for the first time that stories need to be told and retold by readers and viewers, not just by authors. The film planted a seed in an entire generation that grew into decades of creative work. Without the NeverEnding Story, the landscape of fantasy storytelling in film, literature, and games would look meaningfully different today. One film quietly became the foundation of a generation's creative life. Number 1. The movie's central message was a secret cry for help to real children. Here is the fact that matters most. Wolfgang Petersen, when he was developing the film, understood something profound about Michael Ende's story. He understood that Bastian was not just a fictional character. Bastian was every child who had ever felt lost, invisible, sad, or unimportant. Bastian is grieving his mother. He is bullied at school. He escapes into a book because the real world feels too painful to face. And the book, the story itself, reaches out and asks him to be brave. It calls him by name. It needs him. The central message of the NeverEnding Story is that your imagination, your inner life, your private world of dreams and stories is not an escape from reality. It is the most real thing about you. It is the thing that has the power to change the world. Petersen wanted children sitting in dark cinemas in 1984 to feel what Bastian felt when the Empress spoke his name. He wanted them to understand that they mattered, that their dreams mattered, that the stories they loved were not a distraction, but a calling. Decades later, adults who watched that film as children still remember the moment Bastian shouted the Empress's name. They remember it not just as a movie moment, but as a personal moment. A moment when a film looked them in the eye and said, "You are enough, and your imagination can save the world." That was not storytelling. That was a gift. Bonus fact, the secret of the painted landscapes that made Fantasia feel infinite. Here is something that almost no one talks about when they discuss the NeverEnding Story, and yet it is one of the most beautiful secrets hiding in plain sight throughout the entire film. Many of the vast, sweeping landscapes of Fantasia that appear to stretch to the horizon and beyond, the endless plains, the faraway mountains, the enormous skies filled with strange clouds, were not filmed locations at all. They were paintings, matte paintings, to be precise. This was a technique that had been used in Hollywood since the early days of cinema, but the artists who worked on the NeverEnding Story brought it to an extraordinary level of detail and skill. A matte painting is a large, highly detailed painting created on glass or board. It is then photographed and combined with live-action footage using optical techniques to create a seamless image. When done well, you cannot tell where the painting ends and the filmed footage begins. The matte painters who worked on the NeverEnding Story were masters of their craft. They could paint light in a way that matched the actual light on set. They could create depth and atmosphere that made a flat painted surface appear to extend forever. They worked in silence, with fine brushes, building the world of Fantasia one careful stroke at a time. Some of these paintings took weeks to complete. They were made with the knowledge that most viewers would never know they were looking at a painting. That was the point. The illusion had to be perfect, and it was. Today, matte painting as a physical craft has largely been replaced by digital effects. The painters who once created those magical worlds with their hands are a rare and nearly vanished breed, but their work survives in films like The NeverEnding Story, where Fantasia stretches to the horizon in ways that feel more alive than many modern digital landscapes. The secret world of Fantasia was painted by human hands, one quiet brushstroke at a time. Old tools, New magic. The NeverEnding Story is more than a movie about a dragon and a magical book. It is a movie about what happens inside a child when the world becomes too heavy to carry. It is about the moment when a story reaches through the page and says, "I see you. You matter. Keep going." The people who made this film worked incredibly hard. They built a world from nothing, using their hands and their hearts and their stubbornness and their love. They did not have the tools we have today, but they had something just as powerful. They had belief. They believed that stories could save people, and they were right. If you grew up with the NeverEnding Story, you already know this. You felt it the first time Falkor laughed. You felt it when Artax disappeared into the swamp. You felt it when Bastian stood in that attic window in the middle of a storm and finally found his voice. These are not just movie memories. They are moments when a piece of art reached into your life and changed something quietly and permanently. That is what the best stories do. They never really end. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we will keep uncovering them one story at a time.